أنا دكتور خالد وليد، ربان سفينة النجاة إلى شواطئ بكة القدس. I am Dr. Khaled Waleed, the captain of the ship of salvation to the shores of Baka, Jerusalem.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving into this document called Qur'an. And, well, let me tell you, it's a pretty wild ride. It pretty much flips the script on Islamic history and the Quran, especially when it comes to like Mecca and the Quraysh tribe. Are you ready to have your mind blown?
It definitely challenges some assumptions, that's for sure. You can kind of think of it as like a thought experiment.
Yeah.
Like exploring, an alternative narrative, not necessarily endorsing it or anything like that.
Exactly. So Qur'an starts off by quoting those familiar verses from Surah Quraysh, the ones about their winter and summer journeys for trade. But then it takes this sharp left turn. It claims that the Quraysh weren't from Mecca in Arabia at all, but from this place called Quraysh in Palestine.
And to support this, it makes this really fascinating connection between the Quranic verses about the children of Israel being cursed and the Quraysh being expelled from Palestine. They actually use the term the cursed Israeli occupier, which, that getting into the politics of it, it definitely adds another layer to the argument.
It's like they're saying these two events, the cursing and the expulsion, are directly linked. What I find really interesting is that the document then goes on to suggest that the Quraysh didn't just leave Palestine. They migrated to Gaza first and then eventually settled in Petra in Jordan. And get this, they claim Petra is the real Mecca.
That's a bold claim for sure. And they do try to back it up. For instance, they mention these graves in Gaza that are said to belong to the Prophet Muhammad's ancestors, including his father, mother, and uncle.
So they're using these graves as evidence of a Quraysh presence in Palestine. It's like a historical treasure hunt. But I have to ask, is there any archaeological evidence to support this? I mean, Petra is an amazing ancient city, don't get me wrong. But it's always been associated with the Nabateans, not the Quraysh.
That's the thing about history. There are always multiple perspectives, and this document is definitely presenting a very specific one.
It reminds me of sometimes you read a historical account.
Yeah.
And it's like, wait, is this the same event everyone else is talking about? Because the interpretation is so different.
Exactly. And that's what makes this document so intriguing. It's forcing us to kind of confront those different interpretations and question what we thought we knew.
Speaking of questioning what we know, the document also brings up climate. It points out that Palestine only has 3 seasons, winter, spring, and summer. And then it connects that to the verses in Surah Quraysh that mention the Quraysh traveling in winter and summer.
Right. It's like they're saying, see, the traditional Mecca has 4 seasons.
Yeah.
That doesn't fit the Quranic description. It's a pretty clever way of using seemingly simple details to bolster their argument.
It makes you wonder, how much do we really know about the climate in those times? Could there have been variations or shifts we aren't aware of? Or were they using winter and summer more broadly to represent travel during different parts of the year? It's like a puzzle with missing pieces.
Exactly. And this document is offering its own set of pieces to try and complete the picture.
It certainly is shaking things up. So we've got this claim that the Quraysh are actually from Palestine, that Petra is the true Mecca. And they're using historical and climate-based arguments to make their case. What else do they have up their sleeve?
Well, they don't stop there. They go on to reinterpret other parts of the Quran to fit this narrative. For instance, they take verses from Surah Arad, which traditionally talk about the Prophet Muhammad being commanded to worship the Lord of this city, and they apply to Petra. It's like they're saying this verse isn't about the traditional Mecca at all, but about a different city entirely.
So are they trying to paint the traditional Mecca as a place that's somehow wrong? It's not where God intended for people to worship?
That seems to be the direction they're heading in. And that's where things get even more interesting. They take it a step further and actually use verses from Surah An-Naml to claim that the traditional Mecca is a forbidden place of idolatry.
Hold on. They're calling Mecca a place of idolatry. That's a pretty serious accusation. What's their logic there?
They point to the verses where Prophet Muhammad says, "He's been commanded to worship the Lord of this city who has forbidden it." They interpret this to mean that God is rejecting the traditional Mecca because of its association with idol worship.
So they're setting up this stark contrast, right? The true Mecca, in their view, is Petra. a place of peace and security divinely protected. And the traditional Mecca, well, they're basically saying it's a place that's gone astray, corrupted by false beliefs. It's almost like they're creating a whole new religious geography.
And they're not afraid to call out what they see as blind adherence to traditional interpretations. They even criticize those who cling to inherited narratives, accusing them of distorting the Quran's message. It's like they're saying, wake up. Don't just accept what you've been told. Question it.
It's a pretty powerful call to action. I mean, it's one thing to present an alternative historical narrative, but it's another to say that people are misinterpreting their own faith.
And they go on to do just that. When they tackle the concept of the four sanctuaries, this is where they get really philosophical. Instead of focusing on physical locations, they argue that the true sanctuary is a spiritual connection to God.
So it's not about going to a specific place, but about the journey of faith itself.
Exactly. They emphasize remembering God's blessings and seeking his guidance. It's almost like they're reinterpreting the Hajj pilgrimage, shifting the focus from the external rituals to the internal transformation.
It's definitely making me think about the different ways people connect with their faith. Is it about the physical places or the rituals? Or is it something deeper, something more personal? This document is raising some really profound questions.
It is. And it's not just about the big picture stuff either. They also zoom in on specific details. Remember how we were talking about the Quraysh being described as illiterate or unlettered in the Quran?
Yeah, I was wondering what the significance of that was.
Well, they use that to argue that the Quraysh's understanding of Islam was pure and untainted by outside influences. It's like they're saying they didn't need scholars or interpretations. They received divine knowledge directly.
That's an interesting take. So instead of seeing illiteracy as a disadvantage, they're framing it as a strength. A sign of a more direct connection with God.
Exactly. They're suggesting that because the Quraysh weren't influenced by outside sources, their connection to the Quran was more fundamental, more authentic.
It's like they're flipping the script on the whole concept of literacy and religious understanding. I'm curious, though, do they address the fact that the Quran itself was eventually written down and codified? How does that fit into their argument?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And it brings us to another key aspect of their interpretation. The idea that traditional Mecca is actually what's called a masjid dirar. Have you ever heard of that term?
I can't say I have. What does it mean?
In Islamic history, a masjid dirar refers to a mosque that was built with malicious intent, specifically to create division and discord within the Muslim community.
Oh, wow. So they're not just saying that traditional Mecca is a place of idolatry. They're actually comparing it to this historically negative symbol of disunity.
Exactly. And this is where their argument really takes a sharp turn.
So by calling traditional Mecca a masjid dirar, they're basically saying it's a place that goes against the very spirit of Islam, a place meant to sow discord among believers. That's a really heavy accusation. It makes me wonder, how do they reconcile that with the fact that Mecca has been a central pilgrimage site for centuries? Millions of Muslims have performed Hajj there, considering it a sacred and unifying act.
That's where their reinterpretation of history comes in. They're essentially saying that over time, the true meaning of Mecca got distorted, that it became corrupted by those who clung to inherited narratives instead of seeking a deeper understanding of the Quran, and they see themselves as correcting that distortion, as reclaiming the true spirit of Islam.
It's almost like they're saying there's been this long-standing misinterpretation of Islamic history and that they're the ones setting the record straight. It's a bold claim, to say the least, but, you know, it does make you think about how history is often written by the victors and how there are always alternative narratives waiting to be uncovered.
Exactly. And whether we agree with their interpretation or not, this document is forcing us to confront those alternative narratives and to question what we thought we knew. It's challenging us to think critically about the sources of our beliefs and to be open to different perspectives.
It's definitely been a thought-provoking deep dive. This document, Qur'an Araba, takes us on a journey through an alternate version of Islamic history, one where the Quraysh tribe originated in Palestine, where Petra is the true Mecca, and where the traditional Mecca is actually a place of discord. It's a controversial reinterpretation, but it raises some fascinating questions about how we understand history, religion, and the very nature of faith itself.
I think the key takeaway here is that interpretations can vary widely. And what's really fascinating is this idea that names, whether for people or places, they act as these like little clues.
Like historical breadcrumbs.
Exactly. Breadcrumbs leading us back through time. And I'm hoping that by following these breadcrumbs, we can uncover some pretty cool stuff.
I think we definitely will, especially in a place like the Levant.
Right, right. So to set the stage a bit,
Yeah.
the research really highlights this idea of the Semitic language family and, languages like Hebrew, Aramaic.
Oh, yeah, big players in the Levant.
Huge.
Yeah.
And the sources emphasize that they all descend from this common ancestor.
Proto-Semitic.
Yes, Proto-Semitic. It's kind of mind-blowing to think about it, right?
Yeah. Like this grandparent language that all these other languages branched out from.
Totally. It's like a family tree,
Exactly. And just like families, these languages share traits, little bits and pieces that have survived for thousands of years.
Wow, that's amazing. So are you saying that we can actually see this, like, ancient family resemblance in the names we see even today in the Levant?
Absolutely. We see names popping up from different historical periods that sound remarkably similar, and what's even more surprising is they often carry the same meaning.
Oh, wow. Okay, I need an example.
All right, how about Ishmael? That name appears in the Bible.
Wow.
And we also have Ibrahim in Arabic.
Okay.
Slightly different sounds.
Yeah.
But they both carry that same meaning, God will hear.
Oh, that's fascinating. Like, it's the same idea expressed in different ways across time.
It is, and it really shows how names aren't just labels. They're like echoes of cultural values and beliefs that transcend time.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. What other examples stood out to you from the research?
Well, one that I found really powerful was Malik.
Malik.
Yeah, meaning king.
Oh, like the name.
Yes, exactly. And get this, it means king in both Phoenician and Arabic.
Wow, that's incredible. It's like a title that's echoed through the ages, spoken by ancient rulers and modern-day leaders.
Exactly. It really underscores the weight that these names carry, their sense of history and cultural legacy.
It's not just a name, it's a statement.
Right. And this concept of names carrying deep meaning, it even extends to the names we give to places.
Oh, place names. Those are fascinating, too.
They are. Take Jerusalem, for instance.
Jerusalem, yeah.
Its name actually links back to the ancient Canaanite deity Shalem.
Oh, wow.
And it's also reflected in the Arabic Al-Quds.
So you're saying that a single name, Jerusalem, can hold layers upon layers of history, reflecting different cultures and religious beliefs.
Precisely. It's like each name is a puzzle piece, connecting different eras and cultures.
Okay, yeah, I'm starting to see the picture here. What other fascinating place name examples did you find?
Well, Bethlehem is another really intriguing one.
Okay, Bethlehem, the birthplace of...
Exactly.
Sorry, go on.
In Hebrew, Bethlehem means house of bread, but in Arabic, it translates to house of meat.
Whoa. So the basic idea is the same, but there's this like subtle shift in meaning.
Right. It provides a glimpse into how cultures adapt and reinterpret names while still retaining their core essence.
Okay, that's pretty cool. So we've got Bethlehem, we got Jerusalem.
And how about Baalbek in Lebanon?
Baalbek. I've heard of that.
It even retains the name of the Canaanite god Baal.
Oh, wow. Even after, what, centuries of different cultures and influences?
Exactly. It shows that sometimes it's not about one culture completely erasing another, but rather this fascinating blend, this layering of influence over time.
Yeah, it's like those palimpsest manuscripts where you can see traces of older writing beneath the newer text.
It's a great analogy.
This all makes me think about this idea of the Arab invasion that we often hear about when talking about the Levant's history.
Yeah, that common narrative.
But the research seems to suggest it's not quite that simple, right?
It's definitely more nuanced than that. For instance, we have evidence from Assyrian inscriptions.
Oh, those ancient Assyrian records.
Yes, and they mention Arab tribes being present in the Levant as far back as the 9th century BCE.
The 9th century BCE. That's way before the rise of Islam.
Exactly. It suggests a much longer and more complex history of interaction than just this sudden invasion.
Yeah, it's like a slow burn, not a sudden explosion.
A slow burn. I like that.
And the sources even pointed out that the Arabic language itself has all these influences from Aramaic and Canaanite.
Right, like little linguistic breadcrumbs.
Exactly. Leading us back to this idea of a gradual evolution of cultures and languages in the Levant.
A slow simmering pot, if you will.
I love that.
So maybe, just maybe, the Arabization of the Levant wasn't so much an erasure, but more like a resurgence of ancient Semitic traditions that were already present in the region.
That's a really interesting way to think about it. It challenges a lot of assumptions, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Like, what does it even mean to be Arab?
Right. Is it just about geography? Or is it something deeper, something more about culture and language and shared history?
It's a big question.
Yeah.
And the research doesn't shy away from tackling it head on, right?
Yeah.
Like, it even delves into the etymology of the word Arab itself.
Absolutely. And what it finds might surprise you.
Okay, I'm ready for the surprise.
Well, it turns out that the word Arab, or Arab in Arabic, might have initially referred to a cultural or linguistic group rather than a specific place on the map.
Whoa, so being Arab wasn't just about where you lived, but about a shared way of life, a set of cultural practices, and perhaps a common language.
That's the idea. It suggests a much more fluid and dynamic understanding of identity than we often assume.
I'm starting to see how limiting our modern understanding of Arab might be. It's like we've put it in this box defined by borders and geography.
When in reality, it was likely much more fluid and interconnected, especially in a region like the Levant.
Yeah, all these connections. It makes me think about the Hijaz mountain range, that traditionally seen as this dividing line between the Levant and Arabia.
The Hijaz, yes. What if we considered it something else entirely? Instead of a barrier, what if we reimagined it as a bridge?
A bridge. Emma, that's a thought.
We'll have to explore that idea further, but for now, let's just take a second to recap everything we've covered.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground already. So we've learned that the Semitic languages we see in the Levant, Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, they share this incredibly deep connection through their common ancestor, Proto-Semitic.
Right.
And we've seen how names, both for people and places, act like these amazing time capsules.
Time capsules.
That preserve bits of history and culture, allowing us to trace those connections across time.
It's like those breadcrumbs we were talking about.
Exactly. And we've started to question that traditional Arab invasion narrative and consider the possibility of a much more complex story of cultural continuity in the Levant.
That's right. It's about recognizing that history isn't always black and white, especially in a region as rich and layered as the Levant.
So stay tuned, because in the next part of our deep dive, we're going to be exploring even more intriguing examples that challenge our assumptions about names and identity in the Levant.
Including taking a closer look at that Hijaz bridge.
You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. We're picking up right where we left off, exploring the fascinating world of names in the Levant.
Yeah, it's amazing how much we can learn about a region's history and culture just by looking at its names.
Absolutely. And to illustrate this point even further, let's delve into a specific example that was highlighted in the research.
Okay, I'm ready. Give me a name.
How about Kiryat Arba?
Kiryat Arba. Okay, that rings a bell. It's a place in the West Bank today, right?
That's correct. But as with so many things in the Levant, there's a much deeper story here waiting to be uncovered.
I knew it. So let's break it down. We know that Kiryat often means town or settlement in Hebrew, right?
Yes, you got it. But here's where it gets interesting. That root word, the core set of consonants, also appears in Arabic.
Oh, really? What's the Arabic word?
It's kriya, meaning village.
Hold on. You're saying that Kiryat, the Hebrew word for town, and Kurya, the Arabic word for village, they can be related, like linguistic cousins.
Exactly. It suggests they both descended from a common ancestor, perhaps a word that existed way back in Proto-Semitic times.
Whoa, that's mind-blowing. So what did that original Proto-Semitic word mean? Something like settlement or gathering place?
You got it. Something that perfectly captures the meaning of both Kiryat and Kurya today. It's a beautiful example of how these languages, despite evolving in different directions, still carry these traces of their shared heritage.
It's like those family resemblances, You can see the similarities even after generations have passed.
Exactly. So we've unpacked the first part of the name, Kiryat. Now let's turn our attention to the second part, Arba.
Okay, Arba. In Hebrew, that means four, right?
Yes. And traditionally, it's been connected to those four biblical couples buried in the Cave of the Patriarchs, remember?
Okay, I'm following. But I sense a but coming.
You know me too well. Remember our earlier discussion about how the term Arab might have had a much broader meaning in ancient times?
Right. Like it might have referred to a whole range of cultural or linguistic groups, not just a specific location.
Exactly. So what if, and this is where it gets really interesting, what if Arba in this name isn't simply about the number 4?
Go on, I'm intrigued. What else could it be about?
What if it's actually connected to the word Arab itself?
Wait, are you suggesting that Kiryat Arba could actually mean something like village of the Arabs?
That's the fascinating possibility. And it aligns perfectly with this emerging understanding that the Levant has long been this meeting ground for various Semitic cultures and groups, including those we might now classify as Arab.
So we've got this place name that seems so deeply rooted in biblical tradition, in that four couples narrative.
Right.
But it could actually be pointing to an even older pre-Israelite past, a time when those lines between Arab and Canaanite were much more fluid.
It's almost as if the name itself is challenging those neat historical categories we often try to impose on the past.
It's like looking through those different layers of history, like peeling back the pages of time.
Exactly. And this isn't just an isolated case. The research highlights another great example, Jerusalem.
Jerusalem. Okay, we talked about its connection to the Canaanite god Shelem, which later ties into the Arabic Alquds. But what else is there?
Well, in some ancient Canaanite texts, the city is referred to as Urusalima.
Urusalima. Okay, I see the Shalem in there, but what about that Uru at the beginning? What does that mean?
That's the real mystery. The exact meaning remains uncertain, but some scholars believe it could be related to an even older word for city or settlement, perhaps from a language that predates even Canaanite.
So Jerusalem, a city sacred to so many different faiths and cultures, could have a name that's been passed down and transformed over millennia, carrying echoes of civilizations that existed long before the Bible was even written.
It's a possibility that really makes you think about the vastness of time and how much history is embedded in the names we use every day.
It's like holding a piece of ancient pottery in your hand. You know, you could feel the weight of all those generations, all those stories that came before.
And those stories, those layers of history, they're also embedded in personal names. The research pointed out that many of the names we often consider distinctly Hebrew actually have parallels in Arabic.
Like Abraham and Ibrahim. We talked about that one earlier, how they both have that same meaning of God will hear.
Exactly, and there are many more. David and Dawood, both meaning beloved, or Solomon and Suleiman, both connected to the concept of peace.
It's fascinating how those names, which are so often seen as belonging to specific religious or cultural groups, actually point to this shared linguistic and cultural heritage that transcends those later divisions.
It's a reminder that things aren't always as clear-cut as they seem. And this shared heritage is also evident in the structure and meaning of many Arabic names, even after the Arabization of the Levant.
Okay, I need an example, something that really brings this connection to life.
How about Salim? It's an Arabic name that means peace, which is remarkably similar to the Hebrew word shalom, right?
Wow, yeah, I can definitely see that connection.
Or Samir in Arabic, meaning companion in conversation. It echoes names like Shamir in Hebrew.
Those similarities are undeniable. It's as if these names are whispering secrets from the past, telling us about those deep connections between cultures that we might have forgotten.
Exactly. And even many religious names in Arabic often reflect themes that were already present in those earlier Semitic traditions.
Okay, give me an example.
Well, think about the name Abdullah, which means servant of God.
Yeah, that's a common Arabic name.
It is, and it reflects this emphasis on service to a higher power, a theme that's also present in those earlier Hebrew names that invoke El or Yahweh.
So it's not like Arabic suddenly appeared out of nowhere.
No, not at all.
It emerged from this rich tapestry of languages and traditions that had already been evolving in the Levant for centuries.
Precisely. And by understanding this, we can start to break down those rigid boundaries we often create between cultures and see those historical connections, that beautiful flow of ideas and languages.
We've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored linguistic connections, challenged historical narratives, and we're starting to see how these names can offer powerful clues to understanding the complex cultural tapestry of the Levant.
We have. But there's one more crucial piece of the puzzle we need to examine, and it's circled back to that mountain range we talked about earlier. The Hijaz.
The Hijaz. You mean that supposed barrier between the Levant and Arabia, the one that's often seen as separating these two worlds?
Yes, but what if, instead of a barrier, we imagine it as something else? What if it was actually a bridge?
A bridge connecting the Levant and Arabia. That's an interesting concept. It definitely flips the script on the traditional narrative. I'm ready to cross that bridge and see where it leads. All right, welcome back to our deep dive into names of the Levant. We've been on quite a journey so far, haven't we?
We have, from ancient language roots to those hidden cultural connections.
And now, as promised, we're going to explore this intriguing idea about the Hijaz Mountains.
Ah, yes, the Hijaz. Instead of a barrier, what if we thought about it as a bridge?
A bridge. I like that. But mountains, I mean, they usually separate things, right?
They do, geographically speaking.
What?
But they can also become pathways.
Pathways for what?
For cultural exchange. Think about those ancient trade routes, the ones that crisscross the region, connecting the Mediterranean to southern Arabia.
You mean like the incense route? The one that everyone's always talking about.
Exactly. And the Hijaz, that was a key part of it.
So people, goods. They were all passing through those mountains.
Exactly. And with those travelers came ideas, languages, cultural practices, all flowing back and forth across the Hijaz.
Wow, okay, I see it. It's like those mountains, even though they look like barriers, they actually facilitated all this interaction and exchange.
Precisely. And it wasn't just traders. Nomadic tribes, those groups often linked to Arab identity, they would interacted with those settled communities in the Levant.
For trade, grazing, maybe even forming alliances.
All of that. And those encounters, they inevitably led to blending, a sharing of languages and traditions.
So the Hijaz wasn't a wall, it was a melting pot.
A great way to put it. And this brings us back to that question of Arab identity itself.
The big question. Because, I mean, we typically associate Arab with the Arabian Peninsula, not the Levant.
That's the traditional view. But remember, our research suggests the term Arab might have originally referred to something much broader.
Broader? You mean like a cultural or linguistic group, not a specific location?
Exactly. It points to a much more fluid understanding of identity than we often assume.
Okay, so being Arab wasn't about where you were born, but about how you lived, the language you spoke, the traditions you followed.
That's the idea. And remember those northern Arabs we talked about? Those mentioned in the Assyrian inscriptions.
The ones in the Levant, way before the traditional narrative of the Arab conquests.
Exactly. Their presence supports this idea that Arab identity, in its earliest form, might have been much more inclusive than we typically think.
So are you saying that the Levant, it could have been a core part of that early Arab world?
It's a fascinating possibility, and it fits with that linguistic evidence too, you know? Remember how Arabic shows all those influences from Aramaic and Canaanite?
Right, those linguistic breadcrumbs.
It points to this deep, long-standing connection between the languages and cultures of these regions.
So the Levant wasn't just Arabized, it was always part of this interconnected Arab world, at least in a cultural and linguistic sense.
That's what the research suggests. And you know what group really embodies this idea?
Who?
The Nabateans.
Oh yeah, the Nabateans. They were incredible. Built that amazing city of Petra.
Exactly. And their culture, it was a unique mix of Arab and Canaanite elements.
They even developed their own script, didn't they? The one that eventually led to the Arabic alphabet we use today.
Exactly. The Nabateans, they really showed that cultural boundaries, they're not always so clear-cut.
Especially in a place like the Levant, where so many cultures and languages have interacted over time.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up this deep dive, what are your main takeaways?
Well, for me, it's a reminder that simple labels like Arab or Canaanite, they don't always capture the full picture.
Agreed. Especially in a region as historically complex as the Levant.
It's like we need to zoom out, look at the bigger picture, consider those connections that go beyond our modern categories.
And maybe most importantly, it's about recognizing the power of names.
Right, those names we use for people and places, they're not just labels, they're keys.
Keys that can unlock hidden stories and challenge our assumptions.
And ultimately connect us to a past that's both familiar and incredibly foreign at the same time.
Beautifully said. It's like we've been on an incredible archaeological dig, unearthing layers of history and revealing those unexpected connections.
And it's left me with a sense of wonder and a desire to keep digging, to keep exploring.
Exactly. That's the beauty of learning, isn't it? It's about asking questions, challenging our assumptions, and always being open to new discoveries.
And on that note, to everyone listening, I encourage you to think about the names you encounter in your own lives. Do they hold hidden stories, cultural connections waiting to be uncovered?
You never know what you might find if you start digging a little deeper.
Thanks for joining us on this incredible deep dive. Until next time.
أنا دكتور خالد وليد ربان سفينة النجاة إلى شواطئ بكة القدس. I am Dr. Khaled Waleed, the captain of the ship of salvation to the shores of Baka, Jerusalem.